Now we're ready to use the settings in the main view, the preference setting. You remember that we were going to use the Settings app to set some of these user preferences for the following words, also known as the words of wisdom, and for the speed slider. And as you may recall, we used NS user defaults, actually standard user defaults and NS user defaults class method to gain access to the standard user defaults. We can store data there and then get it back when we need it in our app. To store data, we use the setObjectForKey method. The first argument, setObject, is the object you want NS user defaults to save, which is following words. And the second argument is forKey, and that's K words of wisdom, which is how NS user defaults identifies it. So we're going to actually modify Flipside View Controller didFinish method in main view controller to save the user preferences. Here we are back in main view controller.m. As you'll recall, we have added our synthesize statements here. We've also commented out the section that set falling words to peace on earth, because now that's going to be set as a preference. We go down to the Flipside View Controller didFinish method, which is past our timer, past the animation block. Here, this is where we want to save the user preferences. Before this dismiss modal view controller animated method statement, we're going to put a few others. We're going to start with an if condition. If controller words of wisdom, and then inside the brackets, we have statements. The first is self falling words becomes the controller words of wisdom. NS user defaults, standard user defaults. Set object falling words, K words of wisdom, close bracket, semicolon. Our first if condition. Now we'll do one for the slider value. Controller slider value, type our bracket so that we can add a few statements here. Speed becomes K max speed minus controller slider value. NS user defaults, of course, has to be standard user defaults. Set double controller slider value for the key K speed. And so what we've done using standard user defaults, which is a class method of NS user defaults, we use it to gain access to the standard user defaults. We can store data there and get it back when we need it. To store data, we use the setObjectForKey method. Set objects, the object you want NS user defaults to save, which is falling words. The second argument is forKey, or K words of wisdom. Falling words here and K words of wisdom here. And the same thing for control slider value and K speed. Sets the value of the specified default key to the double value. Now we already have the dismiss modal view controller animated method supplied with the utility application template as part of the Flipside View Controller didFinish method. It animates the view as it's dismissed. The code is sending the message to the view controller that invoked the present modal view controller method, in this case, the IBAction showInfo method, which is right below it. The IBAction showInfo, of course, kicks off our Flipside view. Now it turns out that when you use the setter method with a class to assign an object pointer, you don't need to send the object a retain message because the setter method does the retain for you. However, using an accessor method automatically sends a retain message. You still have to release it when you're done. Properties are not automatically released for you. Thus, in our dealloc method, which is down here, we need to send the object release message. So, word timer, we need to release, and falling words, we also need to release. Okay, we're going to try and run this to see what happens. It builds my world just fine. Doesn't seem to be any errors or issues, and it launches. We still have our peace on earth, we still have our advertisement, and the advertisement still works. The code we've added hasn't damaged anything on the main view. Let's take a look at the Flipside view. Well, we haven't put our interface objects in yet, but everything is working, including our done button. And so we are happily going to move on and add more interface objects to the Flipside view so that we can change the peace on earth text and the speed of the animation. Now, before we continue, of course, we should quit the app by clicking down here, the home button, and reset the iOS simulator by choosing Reset Content and Settings from the iOS Simulator menu and clicking the Reset button.